You're listening to a CNA podcast.
Earthquakes are deadly and can destroy entire cities in a matter of seconds.
How would you respond in the event of an earthquake? Let's take a moment to stop and think.
In 2007, Japan's meteorological agency launched the Earthquake Early Warning Service. The nationwide publicly available service was the first of its kind in the world. What you heard there was a clip from a video introducing it to the public. It shows devastating images of destruction and plays out scenarios of what to do if you find the ground shaking beneath you. The video sort of feels dated when you watch it, but the warnings and the advice are definitely not. Strong tremors in Japan can now trigger quake and tsunami warnings, giving people the precious seconds they need to get to safety. I'm Teresa Tang. CNA's Michiyo Ishida joins me from Tokyo this week. We talk about how effective the system is and why some critics argue it could actually make things more dangerous. Hey Michiyo, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
When I was preparing for this episode, I had flashbacks to the days when I was in primary school. I grew up on the west coast of Canada, and we often had earthquake drills. We'd practice what to do if a quake ever struck while we were in class. And the process is basically you duck, cover, and hold. You hold on to something. And as kids, it became something we just practiced all the time. Students in Japan do something similar?
Well, here in Japan, schools regularly hold drills. In fact, when I recently visited a classroom, I noticed that each desk has a helmet hanging below it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they can use them to cover their heads if there's an earthquake. Now, even without drills, there are so many earthquakes all over Japan, so the students are aware of what to do. What they are supposed to do is after a tremor hits, they flee to the playground where there's space and there's less risk of debris crashing on you. And also, companies here in Japan, they hold drills at least once a year. Corporate workers use the stairs to evacuate because you can be stuck in the elevator if power outage happens. And those who live, let's say, 5 kilometers away from the office, you are demanded to walk all the way for the drill. Because if an earthquake hits, and if it's a big one, public transportation will usually be suspended. And Japan designates September the 1st as Disaster Prevention Day. And why? Well, it's to remember the 1923 Kanto earthquake. Its epicenter was in Sagami Bay, and the measurement on the Richter scale, magnitude 7.9. Now, this was outside of Tokyo, about 100 to 200 kilometers, but the damage was huge. 105,000 people were killed. Close to 300,000 homes destroyed by fire. And it's because experts speculate it happened on lunchtime that the damage was huge. Fire broke out in many places. So for drills, practicing how to use fire extinguishers is also important.
Yeah. And also growing up, I always heard this phrase, the ring of fire. It sounds so ominous. And it refers to a bunch of underwater earthquake sites and volcanoes around the edge of the Pacific Ocean. Vancouver, where I'm from, sits inside this ring of fire, and so does Tokyo. Japan is actually one of the most earthquake-prone areas in the world. How much does that fact loom over people generally in Japan?
Well, we can't just think about earthquakes every day because we have to carry on with our lives. And, we do experience tremors from time to time. But my hunch is maybe here in Tokyo, we experience earthquake a few times a month. Generally, they're dismissed because they're minor. I can feel my chair shaking, for instance, but then, it stops. When we do hear or see big earthquake damage elsewhere in Japan, that's when people become worried. And basically, to some extent, the people who are residents of Japan are prepared. At least most of my relatives and friends who I talk to are.
Well, part of the reason we're doing this podcast is because of what happened about 2 months ago today. Listen to this.
Authorities have, however, issued an alert warning about a possible large or mega earthquake around Nankai Trough, south of the island of Honshu.
That mega earthquake warning was issued on August the 8th, and it came after a magnitude 7.1 earthquake in the Pacific off Miyazaki Prefecture in Kyushu. Mitch, megaquake? That just sounds scary. What was your reaction when you heard the warning?
Yeah, well, Miyazaki is really far from Tokyo. It's on another island on Kyushu, and Tokyo is on Honshu. But when I heard that warning, I really didn't know what to do, how to react. It was the first time I heard of this, whatever you should call it, gigantic, huge mega quake warning. We've been constantly reminded about the possibility of the Nankai Trough earthquake, but no, with this warning, it seems so real from past experience after a big earthquake, and even bigger aftershock is likely. Let me give you some examples. A few days before the magnitude 9 earthquake on March 11, 2011, there was a magnitude 7.3. And I remember my friend in Sendai and Miyagi Prefecture telling me, there was a really strong earthquake on March 9th. She was scared. Then 2 days later, on March the 11th, the most powerful earthquake in the world since 1900 struck. And another example is in Kumamoto Prefecture on the Kyushu Island, April 14, 2016, a magnitude 6.5 earthquake struck. Now, the epicenter was under the land, so the jolt was really powerful. And 2 days later, an even more powerful magnitude 7.3 struck. So mega earthquake warning cannot be taken lightly. There's a strong possibility that aftershock could be the real earthquake.
Yeah, that's a good point. And when Japanese people heard that megaquake warning, they really took it to heart, Some jumped into action because they believed they were on the brink of a disaster, right?
Yeah, well, for instance, the Japanese railway companies are used to dealing with disasters because it's not only earthquakes that we have typhoons, volcanic eruptions, floods. So, we're a disaster-prone nation. JR Central immediately acted by reducing speed of its bullet trains when running along the Nankai Trough area. Famous beaches, I heard, were closed. And, this was smack during the summer holidays. Hotel bookings along the Nankai Trough area were canceled. And I heard the general public started to rush to stock up on food, water, toilet paper, and rice. And we are short of rice in Japan. And one of the reasons we hear is because the public stocks up on rice. And
no way.
that was a huge problem. And that still remains to be a problem. And rice prices have been going up because of that since. The Cabinet Office estimates that 323,000 cases of death is possible if the Nankai Trough earthquake strikes, and this figure is alarming. Now, Professor Naoshi Hirata, who heads the panel of experts for Japan Meteorological Agency, said a month since the warning was issued, explained his stance on earthquake warning, and he addressed the National Press Club. He's also honorary professor of Earthquake Research Institute at the University of Tokyo.
Earthquakes basically occur suddenly. We look at probabilities. In theory, we cannot forecast, but we have access to data that shows probabilities. This is not easy for the public to understand. During 1 week, the probability is once in 1,000 on a normal day. This became 4 to 5 times.
Yeah, I want to talk about these warnings and advisories a bit more. But first, what do you do personally, Michiyo? Do you have an earthquake plan or some sort of kit for yourself and your household?
Well, first of all, I do stock up on canned food, instant noodles, bottled water, and the Tokyo Metropolitan Government actually mails handbooks to all households on how to prepare, and it calls for everyone to have enough supply for at least 3 days, but preferably for a week. Now, Tokyo is at risk of a magnitude 7 earthquake with the epicenter under the city, and it has 70% chance of happening according to the government's assessment in 2020. So I also have my furniture secured with stretchable sticks, such as for my wardrobe, cupboard, and bookshelf, because I don't want them to fall on top of me, right?
So it's secured to the wall?
Yes, secured to the ceiling, actually. There's a stick between the furniture and the ceiling. And I keep my slippers by my bed in case I need to evacuate or to protect my feet from, broken glasses, any debris. I also have shoes out near the entrance of my apartment. And I have 2 fire extinguishers on standby in separate rooms. And when I go to bed, I try to keep the door open leading to the entrance to prevent the possibility of tremor distorting the door, because if the door doesn't open, I can't escape, right? When I go out, I try to make sure to carry snacks in case I'm stranded. Some sanitary items like toothbrush and toothpaste, in case I can't brush my teeth for a couple of days. I carry my disposable contact lens because I need to see. And I hear a lot of people have issues during earthquakes that they've forgotten their contact lens or their spectacles or glasses.
Wow, you sound really prepared.
Yeah, but my bag would be really heavy if I try to put everything in.
Yeah, good point. Many people in Japan and beyond Japan remember the March 2011 quake and tsunami disaster in the Tohoku region, and of course the resulting accident at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant. You reported on all of that. And then the January 1st of this year on the Noto Peninsula, there was a quake there as well. Can you tell us more about your experience?
Sure. Well, the latest on the Noto Peninsula, I remember I was in Tokyo at the time when the quake hit. It was not strong, so I didn't think it was that serious. But when I was on the ground, when I tried to drive around with my cameraman, Noto Peninsula, which is about a 100-kilometer stretch, I saw how bad the damage was. Throughout, roads were damaged. There were landslides. We had to take the safe roads, and it was traffic jam around the area. We were stuck with, emergency cars, and ambulances were stuck too. So it was a terrible scene. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to make it to Wajima, which was one of the hardest hit cities on the Noto Peninsula. It usually, I heard, takes an hour and a half from Kanazawa, the capital of Ishikawa Prefecture, to Wajima, but it took 4 to 5 hours one way.
Wow.
I took my diaper, adult diaper, and I took diapers for myself and my cameraman. Because, I could possibly not use emergency toilets at evacuation shelters that I visit because they were quote unquote full. After the March 2011 magnitude 9 earthquake, which I witnessed tsunamis on TV live, which NHK filmed from their helicopter live, I really thought Japan was over. We witnessed live pictures of 10 meters plus tsunamis, devastating the coastal areas. And I recall there were tsunami walls in many parts of the Pacific coast of Tohoku area, but the tsunamis were so powerful, much of those walls were destroyed too. I actually visited one of the world's largest tsunami walls in Taro and Iwate Prefecture years before that disaster, but that was destroyed. Then there was a discussion whether it was worth having tsunami walls or should higher tsunami walls be built. Mm-hmm. But there's this issue of tsunami walls blocking the view. If tsunamis were coming, you can't see tsunamis coming.
Oh, yeah.
So how to escape, right? So there was that issue. Now, what Taro and Iwate Prefecture did was quite interesting. They built tsunami walls. They rebuilt the walls. But they decided that they should build it in a way that they could see through the walls. So if tsunamis were coming, the residents will see tsunamis coming. Mm-hmm. It would know that they need to escape fast. Now, the other disaster at that time was the nuclear disaster. This was horrifying as well. I recall attempts to cool the reactors with rescue workers flying over the reactors to pour seawater, because that was the only way to attain water at that time. It was unprecedented and extremely dangerous, with radiation spewing all over. And then, although I was 300 kilometers away from Fukushima in Tokyo, my bosses at the time called me and told me to close my windows because radiation level in Tokyo was rising. I was even offered to evacuate from Tokyo to Osaka, because it was too dangerous. Now, I didn't. I stayed. Mm-hmm. At that time, there was a so-called nuclear safety myth, but that was, basically shattered. Japan, from relying 30% on its energy on nuclear power, that was revised by the government to zero nuclear energy policy. All nuclear reactors that were not running at the time had to undergo strict screening for its earthquake and tsunami safety. But today, many reactors deemed safe are up and running again. So the policy has changed years after that nuclear disaster. And the main reason is because Japan needs energy.
There are so many dangers that these plants face. Like you said, the tsunamis, of course, the earthquakes. There's criticism that the advisories when quakes strike or right before they strike can actually do more harm than good. For example, by focusing on a hypothetical big one that may or may not strike in the decades to come, that could actually defer resources away from communities that might be considered low risk.
Yeah, it could lead to overreaction. We've been hearing that the mega earthquake warning has dented tourism economy. It happened, the warning was issued at a time, August 8th, was during the summer holiday season. Hotel bookings were canceled. Entertainment was canceled. Firework festival was canceled. So it hurt the economy, especially the rural economies, which we're trying to gain from that season. Mm-hmm. And that same month, we had Typhoon Shanshan, which was a powerful typhoon. And it put the economy on a standstill too. And economists here say that the warning and the typhoon both impacted Japan's GDP. But then some analysts, especially seismologists, say that overreacting is better than not reacting. Mm. Professor Hirata repeated that the most important thing is to survive. And for that, the basic need is to build structures with seismic strength. But in the event of tsunamis, the only way to survive is to flee. And that survival is most important than anything else.
Yeah, but surviving is one thing, right? You survive a really large earthquake, but there's trauma that comes with that survival, especially if you've been through a quake of a significant size. There are aftershocks, for instance, and sometimes there can be hundreds or even thousands of them. And in fact, I wasn't aware of so-called phantom quakes until an editor explained to me that that's basically when the ground is perfectly still, but people still feel the sensation that the ground is moving. Had you heard of this?
Well, I think I've been experiencing it as well.
Oh.
Yeah, after the magnitude 9 earthquake on March 11, 2011, there were many aftershocks. We constantly heard emergency alarms going off and the ground shaking. And many of us were actually nervous because even here in Tokyo, the aftershocks were quite big. And, because we were nervous, we were feeling dizzy at the same time. That feeling after you're on a long boat ride for hours and hours. You reach the port, you're still kind of shaking, feeling dizzy. It's a similar kind of sensation. I heard that the term, rather than phantom earthquake, here in Japan is known as the post-earthquake dizziness syndrome.
Oh.
The body sort of accumulates the sensation of the quake, and combining with fear, you feel like you're shaking the whole time. And according to the Japan Society for Equilibrium Research, over 70% experienced this syndrome after the March 11, 2011 earthquake, and I probably was one of them. And most people recover naturally after a few months after the aftershocks sort of, quiet down, but the society calls for those with such symptoms to go out, exercise, don't watch footage of earthquakes or tsunamis on TV, and social media to avoid accumulating stress.
So as we talked about, after that mega quake warning, in August, the concern was for the Nankai Trough, right? That's the region that's seen a massive quake every 100 to 200 years or so. And the Japanese government says there's a 70 to 80% chance that it's going to hit in the next 3 decades. Michiyo, how likely is it to strike based on people you've been talking to?
Well, Professor Hirata, again, who has the panel of experts on the Japan Meteorological Agency panel, he said that based on the new assessment released by the Cabinet Office this January, the odds of a magnitude 8 to 9 earthquake is 70 to 80% within 30 years. If it's within 10 years, the odds are 30% chance. If it's within 50 years, it's 90%. So it depends on the span, the length of the year you're looking at. So if you're born today, you're expected to experience the big one.
Wow.
So Professor Hirata explained seismologists are looking at written records from the 7th century, all the way to the 7th century. Mega earthquakes have occurred based on that once in 200 years in the past few centuries, once in 100 years. And the last ones in 1944 and 1946 were some of the big ones. It's vital for seismologists to assess, also working with historians Now, in terms of technology, Professor Hirata said that there are new instruments in place. That's since the 2011 magnitude 9 earthquake. They've placed those instruments in the seabed called SNET. It analyzes the mechanism of the earthquake to quickly disseminate information on quakes and tsunami. And such instruments have actually helped, according to Professor Hirata, to contribute to issuing quake warning up to 30 seconds earlier than before and detect tsunami coming 20 minutes earlier than before. So it's a big, I guess, advancement in that sense. You have more time to prepare.
Definitely. Time is of the essence in a situation like that. Okay, so what's next then? After we heard that mega quake warning for the first time ever, have authorities done anything or have they vowed to take action since August? Keeping in mind, it doesn't only affect locals, people like you, Michiyo, but these warnings affect things like the markets and tourists.
Yes, it's true. It does impact a lot of people and the market as well. But let me give you an example of what happened at that time. We heard in terms of evacuation, residents in Miyazaki tried to enter the tsunami tower in their neighborhood, but the gate was locked.
Oh, no.
They were waiting outside the gate. And local authorities decided later that they can kick open the gate. And yeah, because, most important is to evacuate, right?
Yeah.
It's not about not destroying the gate. There were similar cases in buildings designated as accepting evacuees. So this is something that they learned from that August warning. And also a hospital, which was located close to the coast, has decided to relocate because it's too dangerous, with tsunamis looming, and how to evacuate patients who are immobile, right? A city in Oita, also in Kyushu, decided to have on standby a statement of tsunami advisories and announce evacuation through loudspeakers. So that's about informing the public as soon as possible on loudspeaker. Media have since been calling for authorities to develop an app, especially for foreign tourists in various languages. The earthquake and mega advisory all happened during the summer holidays, causing many tourist destinations along the Pacific to be impacted.
It's a terrible situation, but what you're telling me and your stories, it really reminds us that the best thing we can do is prepare, prepare, prepare. Thank you so much for this, Michiyo.
Thank you for having me again, Teresa.
A reminder that the TV episodes of CNA Correspondent air every Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time, and you can find Michiyo's reports on YouTube as well as on CNA.Asia. The team behind this week's episode is Saya Win, Clara Ong, Crispina Robert, Craig Dale, and me, Teresa Tang. Thanks so much for joining us.